Spoštovane, spoštovani, ladies and gentlemen, my guest tonight, this evening, is Frodi Midjord. He's the founder, the leader, the director of Scandza Forum, a speaker, and he runs the podcast called The Guide to Culture. Frodi, thanks for accepting my invitation. I came across with Frodi because we have some mutual acquaintances like Jared Taylor and Michael Jones. Frodi Midjord and Scandza Forum wanted to organize this big event in Zagreb this year, I believe, where the guests should have been Jared Taylor, Michael Jones, Edward Dutton, Tom Sunic. I don't know the whole round table. Anyways, Frodi, thanks for accepting the invitation, and hello.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's the pleasure is all mine. Frodi, what is Scandza Forum and who is Frodi Midjord? Do I pronounce your name correctly?
Yes. Yeah, I was born on the Faroe Islands, but I grew up in Sweden most of my life. So the Faroe Islands, for those who are not familiar with that place, it's a very small place. It's a bunch of islands in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. It's situated between Scotland and Iceland in the middle of the Atlantic, and it only has a population of 50,000 people. So it's a very small place. It's a part of the Danish kingdom, but it has semi-autonomy. So it has its own language, its own flag, its own parliament, but it has some foreign policy in common with Denmark. For historical reason, it was founded by Norwegians during the Viking Ages in the 800s and settled by Norwegians, but for historical reasons, it came to end up under the Danish kingdom. But like I said, I moved to Sweden when I was a child. I lived in Sweden most of my life. And what I could say is that I saw a contrast, because the Faroe Islands is still very much an ethno state. It's a very homogeneous place, whereas Sweden has now come to be the example of a failed multicultural experiment. And I saw that contrast very clearly early on in my youth. And when I became a teenager and became more interested in society around me, I saw that this is unsustainable. This cannot work in the future, and it will lead to a disaster, which it already has. So I became a part of the protest, the opposition to what can only be called as the Great Replacement, of replacement level mass immigration in Europe. So that is how I started my interest in politics and philosophy and political philosophy, etc. The Scandza Forum was founded in 2017. It's a conference. It's a platform for intellectuals, for politically interested people to meet and talk about dissident ideas, what has come to be known as dissident ideas in the West, because after the Cold War, basically, there has been a sort of a flip in the political script, where we have no free speech in the West, and there's actually more free speech in the eastern parts of Europe that were formerly under communist rule. And so we are very much suppressed. Our views are very much suppressed by a financial establishment, by a journalist establishment, by the political establishment. I can tell you more about those details, but the Scandza Forum is a platform for dissidents to exchange ideas, but most of all to network, because what I always emphasize is that people are only to a limited extent rational creatures that analyze ideas and facts and statistics as some sort of calculating machines. Most of all, we are social creatures, and that is also how the power elite in the West tries to limit our freedom of speech is not by giving us arguments showing that we are wrong, but rather by limiting our social lives and attacking us socially, trying to isolate us socially. And that's why these real-world meetups are of central importance, so that people don't only read about dissident ideas online, for example. So it's very important that we meet up. And that is the background of the Scandza Forum. I started in 2017. We organize events mostly in Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. But actually, my conferences started already in 2015, so 2 years before that. But it wasn't called the Scandza Forum then, but it was the embryo of what later became the Scandza Forum. And I've organized about 10 conferences, and I've had guests like Ricardo Duchesne, a professor of sociology. I've had Tom Sunich, I've had Jared Taylor, Kevin McDonald, Greg Johnson, Edward Dutton, I've had Mike Enoch, I've had Millennial Woes, I've had many speakers, Helmut Nyborg, who is a professor of psychology in Denmark, mostly intellectuals, some other, radio podcast personalities as well. Mike Enoch, for example, you spoke at a conference I organized in Oslo, but mostly intellectuals and academics. And it's been very successful. But like you said, we were planning on organizing a conference in Zagreb in May, but that was cut off because of the coronavirus and the travel restrictions connected with the coronavirus. So we had to postpone that until next year when travel possibilities are back.
What are the situations in Sweden, Norway, Denmark? Are they similar, or is Sweden just the worst of them all? According to the question of migration and being submissive to this ideas of great replacement.
I can only answer both yes and no, that Sweden is the worst case, because I would categorically say that Denmark is probably best off of the three Scandinavian countries, because Denmark has a wider acceptance for open debate and freedom of speech, whereas Sweden and Norway are more consensus driven. You are not allowed to stray from the consensus. And Sweden definitely has higher numbers of mass immigration, and the numbers are worse off in Sweden. But what you have in Sweden is you also have a strong protest movement against this. You have a strong movement that says no. You have a very active, and you've had for a long time, for many years, a very active group of people who push the debate and who force themselves into the mainstream and grab a place in the spotlight, if you will, for protesting against what's happening. And in Norway, although the numbers are better than in Sweden, lower numbers of immigrants, you have no debate about the problem. Norway has no debate about the issue. So whereas Sweden is very polarized with a very left-wing extremist establishment, you also have a counterbalance, a counterweight of the protest movement from what we could call the right wing, if you will, or nationalism or national populism. Whereas in Norway, there is complete silence. There is a culture of silence in Norway. And I could also witness this when I organized conferences in Norway, that the reaction from the political establishment was more hysterical in a way. Whereas in Sweden, it's a very normal and natural thing that these kinds of events occur. It is very unusual in Norway, so they reacted completely differently. So there is a difference in culture between the three Scandinavian countries.
Why is it so? What happened to Sweden, for example? What were the Why are Swedes so different from other people, from Scandinavia and from the other parts of the world? For example, more Eastern European countries and so forth.
That is a very difficult question. It is mostly ideological. It has been socially engineered. There has been a social democratic hegemony in Sweden that has really created a great trust in the state. There's very low individualism in a way. There's a high trust in the state and the social democratic program. Just go with the program in a way. And there is a desire, a strong need in the Scandinavian countries for approval by authorities. People are very afraid to stray from the middle of the road in a way. But like I said, Sweden also has a sort of a polarized mentality, so that you have this very strong opposition as well. It's not very strong in numbers, but it's loud. You have strong alternative media, for example, in comparison to the population. We have very strong websites with many readers, with quality content. And like I said, we organize events. You have a very mild national populist party in the parliament since 2010, the Sweden Democrats. They're very mildly national populist, but still they have influenced the cultural climate, the intellectual climate, in the sense that it's now more acceptable to talk about these issues. So there has been more of an activism in Sweden. Norway has a slightly different history. Norway was in a sense decapitated in the Middle Ages. A large portion of the nobility of the upper class in Norway died in the early Middle Ages in the Black Plague, for example, and Norway became a part of this union between Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. And Norway wasn't a completely independent country until just 100 years ago, in the early 1900s. And really what happened in Norway was that the first great event in Norway after its independence was the German occupation during the Second World War. And that has created a mythology. A mythology has come about in Norway around that event. I won't go in too much into details, but in the aftermath of the occupation, for example, women, this is a very well-known fact, that the women in Norway who, for example, had relations with German soldiers, they were treated very, very badly. Even children had to flee from Norway to Sweden because they were treated so badly. Children who came as offspring from such women and German soldiers and the Lebensborn and etc. So there was a sort of religious fanaticism against anything to do with nationalist or national socialist ideology after that, ethnic nationalism. There is a sense of patriotism, but it's a civic nationalism in Norway. So you have to keep those two things separate. But Norwegians have a huge neurosis about this this event in history, and it's the first big event in Norwegian history, and it was the first big event since its independence. So it became sort of the founding myth of the country, that we were the country that resisted the Nazi occupation, and afterward they had their of course, Quisling, he was tried, and their greatest writer, perhaps the greatest writer in all of Scandinavia, Knut Hamsun, he was thrown into a mental asylum because he was loyal to the National Socialists, and Hitler even gave his Nobel Prize medal to Goebbels, actually, as a president. He won the Nobel Prize in literature, and he's a very celebrated figure, but even he was put into a mental asylum. A similar thing happened, of course, to Ezra Pound, and so there has been this mythology, and everyone in Norway has stories about my grandfather was in the resistance movement, these kinds of stories. And it's a whole mythology, and it is a huge part of Norwegian identity. And it has created this irrational relationship to national identity, I would say. And that is a huge part of why people are still today very afraid to even talk about things, because they will be accused of this and that. And of course, with this terrorist maniac Breivik in 2011, that became a new sort of weapon to silence any kind of healthy debate about these issues. So yeah, it is because of events like that, but it's a complex history. It's impossible to just point out one factor, but I would definitely say that that mythology around the Second World War and the occupation is a huge factor in Norwegian identity.
What would you say, what is right-wing or dissident right-wing today, and in your opinion, and from the point of view of the so-called dissident right-wing, how would you look at the guys like Breivik or that fellow from New Zealand that are called from mainstream media, mostly left-wing or progressive mainstream media, right-wing, and this is also the tool to silence people that are already very afraid to articulate their pride to be white or to be Norwegian or to be Swede and so forth. What's your opinion on it?
Well, it's basically two questions. First of all, what is right wing? Now, right and left as political terms, that is obviously connected to the French Revolution, and it's an antiquated term or an antiquated distinction in some ways because it's so old and we have a completely different society today. But still, we have to use the terms right and left because at least I don't know of any other alternative terms that we could use instead, because nothing else would point out the wider categories of left and right. For example, you could use traditionalist, or you could use other kinds of term, or nationalist, but that only points out or only refers to a section of the right. It's only a part of what it means to be right, if you know what I mean. I mean, the right, for example, in history was both futurist and traditionalist. So it is a certain spectrum of attitudes. Personally, I have a sociobiological perspective, and what I consider right wing is not what has historically, probably it's not the same definition as has been historically used, but what I consider right wing is attitudes and behaviors that are adaptive for the tribe. So that nationalism, protecting national boundaries, promoting childbirth, promoting defense against invaders, that would be right-wing, whereas shall we say, the sort of gay pride culture, that would be left-wing. The pathological altruism of caring just as much about people on the other side of the planet as you care about your own tribe or own neighbors or own family, that it would definitely be left-wing. So I see it from a sociobiological perspective. So when it comes to the question of people like Breivik and this other guy, it's very difficult to say much about them because they have caused so much harm. What I want to do is to open up the debate and to open up these questions for debate, because so many people in our societies are afraid to address these issues. They are, in Sweden and in Norway, in many parts of Western Europe, older people are afraid to go out at night because the streets aren't safe anymore. Children are being harassed in school just for being white in their own countries. Many children today grow up in parts of the society where they are already ethnic minorities. This isn't a dystopian future. This is happening right now, and we're not even allowed to discuss these issues. And when a crazy person like Breivik or this other guy in New Zealand or whatever goes out and randomly attacks people who have no power, it's a weird, it's a crazy, insane thing that happens, and it just harms everything that we're trying to do to create a more natural, normal climate, social climate for debate or for discussion about these issues. Is extremely harmful. But then you can ask yourself, why does this happen? Now, I think that human beings have a need and a desire to be taken seriously, and their concerns have to be taken seriously. When you have a huge segment of the population that have massive concerns about themselves, their own physical safety, their culture being taken from them, themselves being replaced as a population, and the safety and the future of their children. Remember that, for example, in Rotherham in England, the state, the government was complicit in covering up a huge attack on the English people by these rape gangs that raped minors. And the state, elements of the state, the police, were complicit in covering this up just because if it came out, that would reflect badly on mass immigration. And we don't want that. That's the ultimate taboo. When you have a culture where people's concerns are not taken seriously and they're not allowed to voice their concerns, you create a very dangerous situation. And essentially the only thing that can happen is that you can go either one or the other way. And the way that I would like to take things is that we break this taboo, we talk about these issues, we allow people to voice their concerns, and we have a mature conversation about these issues as adults. That would allow people to feel that they're heard, their concerns are taken seriously, they're not repressed, their voices are not suppressed by a political establishment, and we can actually reach some sort of progress in dealing with the situation, or we just put the lid on the situation and we sweep it under the carpet and just call everyone who says anything about it or voices their concerns, call them evil, silence them. Well, what will happen is very predictable, because not everyone is mentally stable. Not everyone is can take enormous amounts of pressure. So you will have these predictable outcomes that some people will snap and do crazy things. Now, of course, some people are just insane and will do crazy things no matter what happens in society. So, I mean, there's always that factor of the individual nutcase. But I do think that what we are doing with creating an open debate about these major issues is in fact the major issue. The biggest issue in our society today is that the populations of Europe are being replaced. We're not allowed to talk about that. And if we create an atmosphere where we can talk about that, that definitely lowers the risk of anyone doing crazy stuff on the other hand. So I do think that we are doing much more to prevent those horrible things from happening than anyone in the political establishment who tries to silence everyone and just tries to accuse us for some sort of guilt by association because that person who did this evil thing, he has voiced the same opinion about this or that matter or something like that. That is not a serious way of dealing with the problem. You have to go to the root of the problem, and the root of the problem is that we don't have a normal open society where we can discuss these issues.
Open society seemed to have become a special brand of free society being promoted by progressives, by social liberals, by left wing, by Soros. Open Society Foundation, because they do talk about open society too, and they seem to have a special brand of an open society that is pretty much different than for example, your brand. On the other hand, we have this mainstream conservatives in America, for example, in the States, that have been in the front row of the battle for free speech from 2015 till now, that have won a little battle for Trump and for Republican Party back then. But it seems now that the mainstream conservatism in America, for example, seem to have this similar tendencies as this Soros open society brand of open society. They seem to have this aversity towards ethno nationalism, towards nationalism, and are we the final frontier of the battle for the free speech and for the open society? And why is it so? Is it that we're only motivated because we can't speak about our issues and we would be the same as fast as we would be mainstream, or what is your stance on this issue? I can't hear you now.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Well, yes, of course, the freedom of speech, the issue of the freedom of speech is first felt by the people who are not allowed to speak. That is only natural. I mean, that is how it always probably has been and always will be. The reason that I use the term the open society is because it is used by and has been used by this liberal establishment for so long as their brand. And I want to point out that they are hypocritical. Now, the term comes or was made popular by Karl Popper, of course, and he made the distinction between a totalitarian society where the ruling elite knows best and everyone who is subordinated to them should just shut up and go along and not protest. Whereas in open society, you have an issue that is much more important than democracy, because democracy is you can put an election bill in you can vote every 4th year, and that's not so important. What is more important is that you have an open debate. Basically, an open society means that you're allowed to disagree. You're allowed to disagree with the people ruling your society, and you're allowed to disagree with the elites in power. According to that definition, we do not have an open society in the West, because when you disagree with the elites in power, with the journalistic, academic, political, financial elite in power that is a globalist elite, when you disagree with them and when you try to say no to mass immigration and replacement migration to your country, if you try to say no, you will be silenced. You will be silenced by the police, will intimidate you. This has happened on numerous occasions. They will investigate you. They will question people around you. They will knock on your door. You may not get arrested. You may not, be convicted for a crime, but they will quote unquote investigate you. And what that means is that they intimidate you. People do not feel comfortable being investigated by the security service. That is just human nature. So that works as a deterrent. In Norway, for example, the police university college they have a section that deals with research on terrorism. And they list people like myself who are opponents of terrorism. They list people like me in their reports. Of course, that is a method of intimidation. If you try to run an organization, people have... Martin Sellner is an example, for example, of a person who got his bank account canceled just because he says no to mass immigration. Payment processors being able to accept payments with credit card or PayPal, for example, that gets cut off. You get smeared in the mass media. You The left-wing extremists will put pressure on your employer, so you get fired. The media will smear you so that they will ruin your reputation. In Sweden, for example, in 2013, there was an example where the big newspapers hired actual Antifa people who were working with computers to basically hack the comment sections in news articles to find out who was commenting on the problems of mass immigration, who was protesting against this, and they doxed them. They exposed them in the big newspapers. Here are the haters, and they led this witch hunt campaign against them. It ended up with one person killing himself, and several people lost their jobs. So this is the kind of persecution you will face if you say no, if you object to the overarching narrative. And that means, by definition, that we do not have an open society. And this is why I use the term, because they use it as their brand, and I point them out as hypocrites. I call them out as hypocrites because that's what they are. If they are truly in favor of an open society, they will defend our right to object and to voice our concerns and opinions, but that is not the case. You can't hold a job at a university, for example, and object to mass immigration. You will lose your job in almost any. Even people who have the lowest menial jobs will have to have a concerned conversation with their boss or something if they participate in the protest movement against mass immigration. That's why we don't have an open society. So yeah, I point out that that's hypocritical. They are not in favor of an open society. They just use that as a word, as a brand, to push their totalitarian agenda of totalitarian liberalism. You're not allowed to disagree.
Their counter argument, if I may call it like that, is that there are certain ideas, of course, right-wing ideas, ethno-nationalistic or anti-migrant ideas, that produce less free or less open societies. That's why you have to censor such ideas. This is their argument. Counter argument when you point out their hypocrisy, for example. Even when you speak when you talk to academics, professors in universities, they say it has to be done. Yes, we're for open society, for free debates, but not free in the sense that we tolerate ideas that supposedly produce less free and less open societies. I have never seen any empirical evidence for the fact, but yeah, this is what their argument is all about.
Well, that is both hypocritical and false, because the idea is that we are in favor, that I am in favor of the ethnically more homogeneous society. An ethno-state is what I suggest. And that is, in fact, empirically proven, that ethno-states lead to freer societies, in the sense that when the population is more homogeneous, they are more inclined to automatically cooperate. Whereas in more diverse societies, you have to use force to force people to cooperate, because we are biological creatures. We are hardwired to live among people who are similar to ourselves. So a society where we are allowed to live among people who are similar to ourselves, that creates more harmony and more freedom, and the state doesn't have to use as much force as in, for example, this multi-ethnic empire. But it's also, of course, hypocritical, because even if it was true, then that only says that an open society is impossible. Because if almost any utopian totalitarian society has an end goal that after all this tyranny, we will reach utopia. And then it's the same, of course, with the open society idea. The whole point of an open society is that we can have an open society now. It is an open society is a method. It is a method of debating the issues rather than silencing the enemy and using violence. It's a method. It's an approach to reaching sort of cultural change through peaceful means. That is the whole point of an open society. Otherwise, it's like the world war to end all wars. It's an oxymoron in a sense.
About Scandza Forum in Zagreb, we spoke about in the beginning, with all the superstars of dissident right. Did you try to organize it in Zagreb because of the Shengen ban for Jared Taylor? Was this the only reason?
It's not the only reason, but it's definitely a factor because Jared Taylor is prevented from traveling in some of the countries in Europe. So we had to pick a location where he could enter the country. So that was definitely a consideration, yes.
What's your opinion on this fact that this articulate, cordial, argumentative, nice man that likes to debate his ideas is basically banned to travel in Europe because he says that white people in America should stick to each other and the blacks should stick to themselves as tribes?
Well, it's of course both outrageous and comically ridiculous in its, I mean, as all totalitarian societies more or less end up. Definitely communism has had many examples of this where you try to justify things and it just becomes a comical farce because totalitarianism is just a machine that goes on and on by its own accord, and it's people just have to play along and pretend that they agree in the end. Now, the funny part about his ban is that I invited him to speak at my conference in Stockholm. This was in 2018. And when he landed, he was coming in from the United States. When he landed in Switzerland, he was stopped by the border authorities and detained there and then sent back the day or 2 days afterwards. And apparently Poland had banned him from traveling into Shengen. So a country can ban, a country in Shengen can ban you from entering any Shengen country because, of course, it's easy to travel between Shengen countries. And he was traveling to Stockholm to speak at a conference on anarcho-tyranny, which is, anarcho-tyranny is a term that is coined by Sam Francis and American intellectuals, and he used it to describe modern society where the people in power refuse to control the criminals. That's anarchy. So they control the victims instead. And that's the tyranny. Now, Jared Taylor, who is just one such person who speaks out about the anarchy in society, he is a perfect example of a person being silenced. Essentially, they're shooting the messenger, right? So they have created an unsustainable situation in our society, an explosive situation in our society that just simply cannot last, because it is so damaging and it's just a farce. And just pretending just to look the other way, it's not going to solve anything. So what they're doing is just silence everyone who points out that, come on, we can't go on with this. We have to do something about this situation. No, silence them. So that's what they did. They stopped Jared Taylor from traveling into Europe, and that became a perfect example of anarcho-tyranny, which was the topic of our conference. So in a way, his speech was superfluous, because it was an event that spoke more clearly than any of us could ever speak about anarcho-tyranny and the totalitarian situation we have in the modern West.
the peculiar thing about Poland banning Jared Taylor from Schengen is that Poland is a country that's supposed to be traditionally Catholic, conservative, more traditionalist, that has problems with Brussels, with this globalist, multicultural Brussels. But do you know the story behind Poland banning Jared Taylor? Or because this is really peculiar, because Poland is supposed to be a one of the last right-wing hopes in Europe, or in European Union. Um,
Yeah, I mean, this is just another example, one example of many, many, many that show that conservatives, they have as their main objective to get approval from their enemies, from the people who really hate them, namely the left. And the people who are conservative and they want to be left alone, they don't want to overstep, so they will go out of their way to not be offensive to the left, the people who actually hate them. So that is their main objective in the world. And that, of course, makes for this ridiculous situation. And Jared Taylor isn't the first person who has been banned from entering Poland or entering Schengen. I believe Richard Spencer was also banned by Poland at one point, and other people that I've met have been banned from entering Poland. And it is farcical, it is silly, but I think that is a perfect example of why conservatism is a failing political method or a failing political ideology in a way, because it is too timid, it is too afraid, it doesn't have a principled ideology to stand on. So that's why it always is afraid to sort of be offensive to the left. But yeah, what they said, their rationale was that Jared Taylor, he represents a totalitarian ideology, and they don't want that in Schengen. That's their motivation in the actual paper that they wrote. And well, I mean, it's ridiculous, because a person with no power, he has, even if he wanted to be totalitarian, he had no power to be totalitarian, and he was the victim of totalitarianism. He was silenced, and they called the victim totalitarian. That is, it's screaming out in pain as they strike you, as the saying goes. It's completely ridiculous.
Yeah, for one, he doesn't have power, and even if we had power, he always talked about himself as a libertarian on this issue.
Yes.
He's all about freedom of association. He thinks that if you leave people alone, they will group according to their race and ethnicity and so forth. And this is really funny. This is grotesque, and it speaks a lot about what kind of situation we have in the European Union, for example. Because
Yes.
Poland, just a couple of days ago, the Social Democrats in Slovenia went all crazy about Poland proposing to Slovenia to get away from Istanbul Convention. Because of the all gay, homosexual, gender theory issues. But these issues really seem to be just a Potemkin's village. They Do you think this is an important issue for ethno nationalism or for right wing, or is this really just being used as this Potemkin's village, as I articulated before?
Which issue is that?
Um, Homosexual marriage, homosexuals adopting children, and so forth.
Yeah, I think it's
Gender theory.
Yeah, gender theory, definitely. It's a cultural weapon that is used against us. I mean, the whole idea of a homosexual political movement is absurd in itself. I mean, if people have sexual proclivities, It's not something that automatically happens, that they create a flag and a political movement for people who have that particular sexual preference or whatever. It's an absurd thing, and it's of course very destructive. The whole idea of making sex a part of public life is of course destructive, because that should be something private, and it shouldn't be the main narrative of society. That is what people do in their private lives. And of course it is a way to undermine the family structure. It is a way to distract people from the purpose of the family and of marriage. That it's absurd that gay marriage is an absurd idea. I mean, the purpose of marriage is to have children, and they can't have children, and they shouldn't have children. So yeah, I mean, it's an important issue, but at the same time it has been very overemphasized, because if you look at the media, if you look at how much attention transgenderism gets, for example, you would think that you would think that 30-40% of the population is transgender, whereas in fact it is a fraction of a percent. I mean, if transgenderism and all these issues would get attention in the media proportionate to how big a phenomenon it actually is, people wouldn't talk about it. So this is a form of cultural hysteria. The people who have gender dysphoria or some other weird disorder or something like that, it's a very, very few people. I mean, you could go your entire life without running into one person who has those problems, and that we should make that central to how we see our culture, our society. It's a form of hysteria. It's a form of mass insanity in a way.
Let's talk a little bit about race. When you talk about to academics, when you talk about random people, I just spoke with a couple of my friends today about ethnicity, about nationality, ethno nationality, Slovene nationality, for example. I come from a mixed marriage. My father is Slovene and my mother is Macedonian. I was born in ex-Yugoslavia, and it was kind of normal, or at least it was promoted back then, because the communists wanted to create a new Yugoslav nation out of this little tribes. And we spoke about ethnicity, and their argument is basically there is no pure Slovene, because then you would have to go back to the prehistoric times and find the first human being and so forth. This is a very common argument against establishing any case for ethno-nationalism or for race realism and so forth. And this is basically the same argument for race, when you talk about white race, black race, yellow race, they always say there's a spectrum, there is no clear-cut distinction between races. What's your opinion, and how can we establish a common sense good case both ethno-nationalism and race realism?
Well, the problem is that those people who use arguments like that, they are not being completely honest, because you could use the exact same argument against any category, because all terms have this vagueness. You could say that about rich and poor. So can we talk about the issues of rich people in society and poor people in society? Well, exactly how many cents are you allowed to own in order to be considered poor or rich? Well, that is a nonsensical question. It's obvious that some people are very rich, some people are very poor. It's the same thing with this goes back to ancient philosophy with, if you have a heap of sand, or if you have a mound of sand, how many grains of sand do you need? That is a nonsensical question. Yes, there is vagueness around the edges of most concepts, or all concepts, in fact, in the world. That doesn't mean we can't use those concepts, because we know what they mean. And when it comes to this other suggestion that you said about purity, well, a race by definition is open to hybridization. I mean, that is the difference between biological species and biological races. That between species, hybrids aren't possible, because either they can't get fertile offspring or they can't get offspring at all. That is the definition of a species. Whereas with races, there are these around the edges. You will see, the sort of hybridization sometimes that will occur. That doesn't. Just because you can find one or two examples of people who are mixed between Somalis and Swedes, you can't say that, well, that means that no Somalis and no Swedes exist. Everyone knows that's a nonsensical argument, because you can see that there are Swedes and there are Somalis. And of course, when it comes to the boundaries between neighboring countries, those distinctions will be less clear than between someone who is from the other side of the planet. That is just obvious, and that is why, I mean, it's only natural that some mixing happens between neighboring countries in the same region as in your case, for example. That is only natural, and that has always happened, and no one really sees an enormous problem with that happening every now and then. That is not an argument against ethnicity or nationality or race. What happens now is a completely artificial situation where we have moved millions of people from Africa into Europe, and we are being replaced as a population. And no other race in the world has a problem seeing this. It is a form of we get some sort of virtue signaling rewards in our brains when we are very virtuous and very good, and pretend that we don't see this. Every other race is very clear on this. They see themselves as a group, and they see others as a group, and that is no problem. That is the most natural thing in the world. When we become ethnic minorities in our own countries, we are the victims. We will be the victims of their hatred against us. You can just see now with the Black Lives Matter how much they hate white people. You can see these videos of black people running up to white people, hitting them in the back of the head with a brick just because they're white. It happens all the time because we have a cultural narrative that legitimizes violence against white people. And when we become ethnic minorities in a situation like that, it is extremely dangerous. It is people who do this to their children just so that they can get, be patted on the back by their colleagues, and no one will call me racist, but my children will be a tiny minority, and they'll be, they'll just be victimized by hostile groups. That is insane. This is completely insane. Swedish children are being raped in school in Sweden. I mean, by immigrants. This and it's covered up. Because we have this culture. Even like I said in the beginning, with the Rotherham cases, and Rotherham is just one example of many, many, many in England, and the police have been complicit in covering it up, because if word gets out about these issues, that sort of shows that the whole multicultural utopia is a lie. Because people are hardwired. We are biological creatures. We have evolved in tribes, in social circumstances. We are not individuals. We are evolved in tribes, in social circumstances with other people who are similar to us. And that is why we have this preference. That is why we work as a group. That is why we are naturally attracted to other people similar. And that's why the most harmonious society is one that is built on the knowledge of our tribal nature. We'd like to be around people similar to ourselves.
The role of Christianity and submissiveness of white people. I consider myself a Catholic, and I can surely see there are different brands of Christianity. For example, traditional Catholicism is different than modern Catholicism, or Protestant or evangelical or Orthodox Christianity. There are probably even more subtle differences and more semi or micro brands of Christianity. So there are differences. You cannot talk about Christianity as monolith, and that's why I don't like Nietzsche's critique of Christianity that much. But on dissident right, there is an important discussion between neo-pagans, if I may call them like that, and Christians, who are mostly then traditional Catholics or Orthodox Christians on the dissident right, and the neo-pagan side says that Christianity is basically a soul's subversion. This is a hypothesis I often heard from neo-pagan. What's your position on this important topic?
Yeah, it is an important topic. And I see a lot of value in Nietzsche's criticism, mostly because Christianity is so fundamental to the modern world that it is difficult to question our assumptions without questioning the basis of those assumptions, which is Christianity. Because what happened is it was the conversion to Christianity was so fundamental that even with the sort of Enlightenment criticism against Christianity, that only peeled away some of the sort of supernatural concepts of souls and afterlife and eternal life and the existence of God. It's these supernatural questions, but what was left, and this is what Nietzsche has sort of been pioneering in pointing this out and sort of helping us along the way of understanding this, is that what was left was the values of Christianity, the basic assumptions of the values of our society, what we understand as in good and evil terms, etc. Those ideas come from Christianity. A person like Richard Dawkins, for example, who is notoriously anti-Christian. He hates Christianity. I mean, he misses no opportunity to attack Christians, but he only attacks these supernatural issues. All his liberal assumptions about morality and society and ethics, they come from Christianity. I would say. So I would say that we cannot discuss the fundamental problems of the values that govern the modern world without discussing Christianity. And the values of liberalism, even the values of Marxism, come from a large extent from Christianity. They are a part of the same, the overarching meta-narrative. In a way, accepting mass immigration with the argument of pity would have been incomprehensible for Europeans before Christianity, I would suggest. That's just one example. I think that this is a very complex issue. It's a very big issue, but I definitely agree that that the values of the modern world are linked to Christianity. I think that is inescapable. And I think that there are some issues that are, more immediate as well. I mean, you have people who are Christians. Well, if you are a Catholic, if you are a very sort of strong Catholic, would you prefer, say you're American or you're from whichever country really, but would you prefer that your country remains strongly Catholic by massive immigration from Mexico or whatever, or would you prefer that it is an ethno? Would you prefer that your ethnic group is stronger, but your religion is in an inferior position. People have to. I've asked this question. I've asked many people who are nationalists, and usually they prefer that their race goes into oblivion if Christianity survives. And now that might seem as a very hypothetical question, in a sense, but you have to realize that white people are now a minority among Christians. White people are not. There is this tendency to assume that we're still in the 1700s, where we could say that he is a Christian and he is a barbarian. That just means that he is a European and he is from some other continent. That is no longer the case and hasn't been for a very, very long time, and it's never going to be that way again. So you can't just use that sort of equivocation between terms anymore. So that is in fact a real issue. Where is your strongest loyalty?
Yeah, well, my opinion, and this is only speculation, is that the French Revolution had such an impact on European civilization that people became afraid to articulate conservative ideas from that point on. And this holds for secular traditionalists as for Catholics, the same. I believe what you told before about conservatives. This is, but I noticed this with Catholics and Christians too. They are afraid to articulate their conservative ideas towards people that hate them, but this only says that they are in submissive position towards this people. And to be honest, the whole European civilization is in a submissive position towards these values of French Revolution. That have won the battle, the cultural battle in our civilization, seemingly. And I do think that this pro-migration values don't come from Christianity, they come from French Revolution. And yes, then you could say, yes, but French Revolution had values that come from Christianity. And this is a never-ending, or at least a very much more complex, historically, sociologically, philosophically debate than we have time today. But yeah, it's a very tough question and an important question on the dissident right. What is your stance on paganism and its role for ethno-nationalism? Do you have any point of view on?
Yeah, I have a very strong connection to paganism, and essentially the problem of the modern world is the assumption of individualism. Liberalism is based on the assumption that we are individuals and that we are the tabula rasa assumption that we are individuals and we can choose. We can choose what to become. We can choose our own life story in a way, and now we can even choose our own sex or our own race, or if we're going to be a man or a woman, or what job we're going to. Everything is just a life choice, right? And we are individuals. Tribe is an antiquated term. It's not a thing of modern societies. Well, in reality, already when we are born, we are a part of a tribe. We are a part of the historical circumstances. We can already have enemies and friends when we are born that we do not choose ourselves. We do not choose our own mother and father. We do not choose which historical period we're born in. We do not choose. We do not choose which tribe we belong to, which economic faction of society we belong to. We do not choose these things, but they are a part of our identity. And the same is, backwards and forwards in history, that we are links in a chain that goes backwards and forward. And I do believe that the sort of revolutionary nature of Christianity, in that sense, that starting again from year one, we have a completely new conception of the world. And this is what was unique with the conversion to Christianity compared to other religions, that they could sort of assimilate with each other, whereas Christianity demanded that you completely reject the beliefs of your ancestors. And this creates a problem. It's an obstacle, at least in everything that I've encountered from Christianity, has a problematic relationship to the ancestors and to the ancient parts of European history. My view is that we are links in a chain that goes back far, far further than 1,000 years or 2,000 years. Our ancestry goes back very, very far and has very deep roots, and we have to embrace that. I think it's very problematic when, when the whole Christian idea of that, what our forefathers believed before that is evil, those are demons, those are devils, that is essentially Satanism. That creates a very, an almost absurd relation to yourself and to your own roots and to who you are. So, yeah, I think that when you start contemplating your place in the universe and in history and in society, the only way you can find a strong identity and a truthful, authentic idea of who you are yourself is by understanding your roots and of having a very deep respect for your roots. And I think that there is a tendency in Christianity to reject that. Everything before Christianity, in a sense. So yeah, that's why I think that studying that and studying it with a great deal of respect, studying what our forefathers believed in, the society they created, I think that is an essential part of understanding who we are.
But isn't what Christianity actually did, at least the Catholic Church in some parts of Europe, that they adapted to before existent pagan rituals and pagan festives and so forth. That is even one of the left-wing atheistic arguments against Christianity, that they copied the paganism in a sense, that there is nothing original about Christianity and Catholicism, and the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, or it is at least to be searched and followed in a much more complex way. But yeah, this would be my next question.
The nature of Catholicism, definitely, I would say that Catholicism is to a large extent okay, this brings us into deep history, but yes, I mean the Christianity in the early centuries was just an offshoot of Judaism. And of course, when it became the state religion in Rome, it incorporated large portions of the structure of Roman society and the Roman Empire. And the church fathers were educated in classical philosophy, classical literature, and of course they incorporated that into Catholic culture, for sure. And all the celebrations of Christmas, for example, or Easter, or all of those things they are incorporated from the pre-Christian religion. What I would say, though, is that when I talk to Christians, I always get this response, though, that they have this attitude toward the pre-Christian culture that is hostile. I don't think I've met any exception, really, when I've really gone to the bottom of this question. that they have an attitude toward their own ancestors, that there were some sort of barbarians in a negative sense, barbarians, and then all of a sudden came the sort of Enlightenment with Christianity, and it's a sort of a dark ages before that. And that is an attitude that I think creates a sort of a neurosis of the soul in a way, and I think that's damaging. I mean, of course, many people are Christians, and many people are Christians and nationalists, and that is no problem for them. But when I go to the roots of the philosophical issues, I find this conflict, and I find that definitely the people who are not just culturally Christian, people who are culturally Christians, who have the sort of cultural attributes, they live in the culture, it's people who are really strong believers in Christianity, they always have this very hostile attitude toward the pre-Christian ancestors. I find that very damaging for your conception of yourself as a person as well, because the ancestors are a part of you.
I agree with you, but what I would say about this is that this is the consequence of both submissiveness toward the ideas and values of French Revolution and bad philosophy coming out of it. This would be part of my answer to what you just said, and what I basically agree with. I was probably myself guilty of it. I bought into this evolutionistic view of the history of religion, for example, that sees Christianity as a higher step in the evolution of religions, as in everything evolves, and what came before was a more primitive stuff and so forth. And I agree with you. This does make a lot of harm, but what I would say is that it is a consequence of bad philosophy, bad thinking, and a consequence of submissiveness of this thinking and philosophizing to the ideas of French Revolution, and values coming out of it. But this could probably be problematized also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly Enlightenment philosophy, that conflict existed far before the Enlightenment, though. I mean, there were huge conflicts between Christianity and the pre-Christian culture and religion of Europe. When Christianity was established, there was violent conflicts for a long time, and there are so many issues that need to be resolved. And I'm not saying that a Christian person cannot be a good nationalist, for example, have a healthy conception of these philosophical issues. But I think that as a general cultural current, I do agree with Nietzsche that our current views have deep roots in Christian assumptions about the world. So that is where they need to be addressed. There are so many of these issues: the universalism, the cosmopolitanism. It's the religion of the big city as compared to the religion of the people on the countryside who retained their old culture, and it was like the Christianity was the fashionable religion in the big city. It was the cosmopolitan religion. When Christianity was born, it was born in a conflict with Judaism. It was I mean, it was a reformation of Judaism in a way that rejected Judaism's tribal roots. So Judaism was a tribal religion and was rejected by Christianity, which became a universalist religion. All these elements have large consequences, have enormous consequences for how we see the world today. I don't think they can be I don't think these questions can be completely separated from Christianity. And of course, there are always, as in any religion, you will have people who support one side of the issue, and in the same on the other side of the issue you will have people who are Christians, you will have people like in National Socialist Germany who were very strong Christians who supported them, and then you'll have the Vatican rejected them with a statement they made in 1937. I mean, you will have these conflicts within our religion, so you can always find examples and you can find counterexamples. So like you said, this is a very complex issue. My only suggestion is that when we go to the root of the problems of the modern world, of the philosophy of the modern world, of the modern world view, I don't think that can be discussed without taking Christianity into consideration, because I think that the conversion to Christianity is the biggest change that has happened essentially in the history of Europe. It changed our entire view of the world, I would say.
Frodi, we're near hour and a half of our conversation. Thanks for stopping by. Thanks for accepting my invitation. Thanks for a great conversation. Thanks for you being so informative. I hope I can ask for another interview or conversation some other time. I wish you and Scandza Forum a lot of success and many years ahead. And would you like to say something to my audience and to your audience for the finish of our conversation?
Well, I've had a great time. This has been a great pleasure to have this conversation, and I love a conversation where you can really go to the bottom of an issue. And I'm actually planning on writing a book about these questions, about the question of spirituality, about Christianity, especially because it's a question that I have studied and dealt with for many years, and I often end up in these conversations, and I would like to have something that, okay, here I've collected everything that I find relevant on this issue. So it makes it easier for us both to agree and disagree when we know sort of the substance of the matter. So I'm definitely going to write that. But like I said, yeah, I've enjoyed this, and I hope we can have a conversation soon again. And I wish you and your audience all the best.
To your audience too, to yourself, to your family, to your movement, to your forum, everything the best, and have a nice evening. Thank you, Frodi.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.